Welcome back to yet another M340i video. I'm sure you guys must be getting bored from the constant M340i content we've been pushing out on our YouTube channel. However, the reason for this particular video is very specific. So a couple of months ago, we had uploaded a stage 2 M340i build that was based on a pre-LCI car. However, the LCI owners, basically the ones who have the LCI1 M340i and the LCI2 M340i, wanted us to make a specific video with regards to the LCI1 cars. And that is predominantly because the LCI1 cars and the LCI2 cars basically have a different exhaust system compared to the pre-LCI cars. So these cars come with an OPF and secondary cats, and hence these cars sound very different compared to the pre-LCI cars. So a lot of the customers wanted us to show them the kind of options we have for an exhaust change on these LCI variants, and that is what we are going to be focusing on today's build. As always, this particular car has come all the way from Tamil Nadu. This customer has driven nearly 8.5 hours to get to Bangalore. And yeah, we've put the car on the dyno, so we're going to take some baseline runs. And this particular owner has a very specific requirement. So he does not have easy access to basically XP95 from Indian Oil. So I believe he is going to a HP petrol pump, and he is basically buying petrol which says just power on the, the filling station. However, the guys at the bunk are telling him that it's power 95. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do some baseline runs with the stock car, see if it's actually making the same power as the cars that were running on XP95. Then we are also going to be testing the ethanol levels on the petrol that he's got us. And then we'll tune the car with all the stage 2 parts that we're going to fit, and then we'll remeasure and see if this petrol that is being sold is actually just power, regular power, or if it's power 95. So in the screen in front of me, you can see all the data logging parameters that I have loaded into the boot mode app. So all we have to do now is put the car in dyno mode. So let's do that. And soon we'll start to data log the car. So the car is currently running on a stage 1 tune because this ECU was unlocked a couple of months ago. And the customer wanted to run a tune until he actually got the car to Bangalore to get all the hardware installed and go stage 2. So let's do some base runs on the stage 1 map. Then we'll shift to the stock map. And then we'll basically, run all the hardware on the car, and then we will redo the entire thing. So as always, putting these cars in dyno mode is pretty easy. So we are almost ready to go. So now let's start the car. Turn off the handbrakes. Let's close all of these error messages so that we can get into the main menu. So we basically want to go to adaptive content. Let's shift to sports plus mode so that we have the data showing up over here with regards to the sports displays. So now we are almost good to go. We can see that the data logging parameters are working fine. So let me just quickly check where the map slot is. Yeah, so BM3 map slot 2. So that means the car is on stage 195 RON. So now let's switch on the fans and start the dyno testing. So basically we're just waiting for the engine oil temps and the coolant temps to come to optimum condition. Only then we'll be doing a wide open throttle dyno pull. So all of the dyno testing at Harmonixx tuning on the BMW is basically done in 5th gear. So even though 6th gear is the closest to 1:1 ratio, these gearboxes are a little brittle in 6th gear and they tend to slip the clutch. So obviously we don't want to screw up the gearbox on this car. So all of the testing will be done in 5th gear. Okay, here's the moment of the truth. Let's So let's do a wide open throttle pull. The car is making pretty decent horsepower. So we have to wait for the post on to happen. So once the post on happens, let's take a look at how things look. Okay, I've just rolled up the window so you guys can actually listen to what I'm talking without all the wind noise that's coming from a fan. So let's do one more pull and see what the car does. So let's get started. Get into 5th gear. We will also be doing a data log simultaneously. So the interesting fact is some of the LCI1 cars have the burbles on let off. So that is something we will see if we can retain with the tune as well. So let's go. Okay, I've stopped the data logging. Now let's go to the data logging channels and see how the data logs basically look. So we need engine speed. So first what we are going to see is basically how the quality of the fuel is. So that's the first thing I'm going to concentrate on. Okay, so the weird thing is I'm not able to see the engine speed. So let's see why that is happening. Okay, looks like we need to select the RAM channel for the engine speed as well. Let me quickly add that to the mix, and probably we'll have to do another dyno run to see how it goes. Okay, one more go at dynoing the car. So I've added the RAM engine speed because the regular channel's engine speed is not showing up on the data logging channel. So yeah, let's quickly do one more run. Okay, here we go. One more run just to make sure that everything is looking good. So let's shift into manual mode, get into M5. So we have M5 loaded over here. The intake air temperatures are pretty decent. It's not bad. So today is a pretty hot day in the workshop. So it's about 31 degrees ambient temperatures. And the IATs are about 42 degrees right now, which isn't that bad. So let's do a pull. Okay, let's take a look at the data logs. So the first thing we are going to be seeing is how the quality of the fuel in this car is. So I'm going to quickly load up engine speed. I'm going to load up ignition, and I'm going to load up the knock corrections. So yeah, so we do have cylinder 0, 1, 2, 3. Cylinder number 4 retarding to about minus 4.2 over here. So you can see there is a dip in the ignition timing as well. And then it starts to recover. It's not that bad. And then again here we have cylinder 3 going to minus 3 degrees. So yeah, overall the fuel quality is not very bad, but it could have been better. Also, since we are on a stage 1 map, the ignition timing is pretty high. It's running about 13.5 degrees at about 6,800 RPM. So now that we have this sorted, let's check how the IATs look. So we started the run at, just a second. So we started the run at 42 degrees, and by the end of the run we were at 46 degrees. So that's basically a 4-degree jump in the IATs throughout the entire fifth gear pull. That's not bad because, like I said earlier, our dyno fan is very, very nice. So then let me just check a few more parameters that I need to. Let's just see if the fueling is looking okay. Yep, the fueling looks fine. So the high pressure fuel pump and the low pressure fuel pump are doing great. Now let me just check how the boost is doing. So we are going to be loading the boost over here, and we need to check the targets. So for the majority of the run we seem to be doing pretty good. So we are running about 19.5 pounds of boost up top. Let's just see if there are any throttle closures. Yeah, there you go. So oddly this car is throwing a throttle closure even on the stage 1 map. Yeah, that's probably because when the knock retard basically went to -4.5, so that's when basically the ECU went into throttle closure mode, and you can see that it gets better once it gets over here. So the fuel quality is not very great, but this is the best we can work with because this is the closest decent bunk that the customer of this car basically has access to. So now let's see how this goes. Let's look at what the dyno runs are showing. So this car basically made 406 horsepower and 623 Nm on the stage 1 map. Now let's quickly shift the map back to the stock power one, and let's do a dyno run again and see what it does this time. So we'll be doing a data log of the stock map as well. Yes, so we've loaded map 4 onto the ECU, which is basically the stock power level map. Let's do a dyno run on this and see how it does. So again, we are back on M5. Let's get ready with the data logging section of it. Yep, the data log is done. Let's check out the data log. So once again, let's load up the engine boost. Let's load up the ignition timing. Let's load up all the knock corrections. Yeah, so we're still seeing about -3 degrees of knock on the car, which is not that great. Like I said, looks like the fuel quality is not that great. So we're going to call the customer and ask him what he wants to do, if he can switch to XP95. But the power numbers seem to be okay. Just checking if there are any throttle closures because of this. Let's just look at it. Yep, indeed. So there is a throttle closure. Let me just quickly load up the knock retard maps to check if the theory is good. Yep, there's definitely a throttle closure. Let me just confirm that we are on the right map. Yep, we are on map 4, so that pretty much sums up it. You can see that there is a throttle closure over here. So yeah, so now that we have all the baseline runs, let's quickly get the car off the dyno. Let's start installing all the stage 2 parts and some of the interior bits the customers ordered for this car, and let's get the car back on the dyno once the stage 2 hardware parts are fitted. So we noticed something very strange. So while we had put the car in map 4 on the multi-map stage 1, and map 4 is basically for stock power levels, the car was actually making way more power than we've usually seen on stock cars. So what I ended up doing is I actually ended up flashing the stock map back on the car, and there was a difference on the run we did. So that's just to confirm. Let's do one more pull. Yeah, we are in M5. Let me just quickly data log this run as well. Yep, assumption was right. Let the rollers quieten down. I'll turn off the fan and then we'll talk a little about what exactly I'm seeing on the dyno charts. Oh yeah, by the way, the 120 speed champs are still on the car, so that's something we need to look at as well once we're done tuning. So yeah, the coast down is usually a long wait for us, because unless we do the coast down process, we won't be able to achieve the crank numbers that the car is making. So basically what happens is, as we've explained in the earlier videos, so while the coast down is happening, the weight of the roller is already known to DynoJet. So basically they have an algorithm by which they can measure the weight of the roller against the rate of deceleration that the car is undergoing on the dyno, and that's how they measure the transmission losses. So these transmission losses basically show up as negative numbers on our dyno. So those numbers are added to the wheel numbers, and that's how you get the crank numbers. So there is no arbitrary 5% transmission loss or a 10-15% transmission loss that's added to the wheel numbers like a majority of the dynos in the world do. So this is a much more accurate way of figuring out what the drivetrain losses are on modern day cars. So we'll just wait for the coast down to complete. And yeah, one thing I wanted to mention is the dynos always measure power at the wheels, right? So how you end up adding the transmission losses is by the coast down method or by running an arbitrary percentage, which is not the right way. But yeah, so this is why we are able to get accurate numbers from our dyno, simply because we can do it via the coast down method. So we are almost nearing the end of coast down. So let me just stop the dyno and see what numbers the car made on the stock map. Yep, as expected. So on the stock power map that BM3 claims to be map 4, the car made 393 horsepower, and let me just quickly pull up the torque numbers. So the torque numbers are basically around 570 Nm, right? 568 to be precise. But after I flash the stock map back, the car made 374.63 horsepower and 581 Nm. So there's not much of a difference in the torque. However, what the stock map does is it's making a considerable amount of power less than the stock power map on the multi-map, from 4,300 RPM all the way to red line. So we'll put up the dyno charts for you guys to see for that as well. So yeah, pretty much that. So clearly their stock power level map is not completely stock. So now basically we are going to do a run just to show you guys what the stock exhaust sounds like. So let's go through a few gears. Yeah, the exhaust is pretty much muted, so it doesn't sound that great. So now let's take the car off the dyno. We'll basically get it back onto the ramps. We'll install all the parts and then we'll do a rerun and show you the difference in the exhaust note. If possible, we'll also invite a LCI1 owner with a completely bone stock car and see if we can do some back-to-back exhaust pulls on the highway as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the baseline runs. Let's get the car off the dyno now and basically let's start installing all the parts. So as you can see, the car is off the dyno because we are done with all the baseline pulls. So we have put the car on the lift and let's quickly take you guys through all the parts that are going to go into this build. So the first thing that we're going to be installing is the Active Waterworks decat downpipe. So apart from that, on the interior, we're going to be installing this Alcantara armrest. We're also going to be installing these knee pads with basically Alcantara on them. So the next thing we'll be putting in the car is the DO88 charge pipes. So one advantage of running these charge pipes is in very hot climates, the plastic charge pipes have a tendency to basically crack. So a metal charge pipe like this will prevent that from happening. Also on this car, we are upgrading the brake lines with some steel braided lines from HEL. So if you have a stock braking system where the calipers are blue in color, you can run the blue lines. Or if you have a BBK which is basically red in color, or you're running a BMW BBK, so then we also have the red lines basically to match your caliper color. So this is something we'll be installing on the car and bleeding the brakes as well. So the next mod we are going to be installing is basically the MST intake, which is the V2 variant. So this is their new design. It also comes with a heat shield basically integrated into this thing, so that it prevents all the heat from reaching your air filter. So this is the hose for the MST intake V2. Also, a lot of the shops are complaining that this hose is not being installed correctly, as one of the hoses that comes away is not fitting this. So what basically we request all the shops to do is, if you are new to installing these intakes or installing these intakes for the first time, what you do is you remove that line, basically fit it onto the pipe over here, and then slide the filter into the turbo to basically make it easier for you. If you don't do that, and if you try to install the pipe and then yank the pipe out, basically what ends up happening is it ends up breaking that pipe and you'll need a new one, and that pipe is actually about 7,000 bucks. And last but not the least, this is the air filter that comes on the V2 intakes. So just to show you guys some comparison, I have an air filter from the MST V1 intakes. So you can literally see how large the V2 filter is compared to the V1. And the V2 intakes make much more louder induction sounds, and it sounds a lot better than the V1 intakes as well. Although we are yet to see how much of a performance gain that would come from swapping over from the V1 to V2. But for all the current customers, we are basically just ordering the V2 intakes. So let's begin some B-rolls and show you guys the installation of all these parts going into the car. So one reason a lot of our clients send their cars to us from very far off cities is because of the attention to detail we pay while doing up their cars, right? So we'll show you one such example. So we've just started installing the MST intake. So we've installed basically the pipe that goes and sits on the turbo, and now we wanted to smoke test the entire thing and see if it's holding pressure, right? So if you remember the other Pure 800 video we had uploaded on YouTube channel, that was running a Dyno intake, and that intake basically was leaking smoke everywhere. So now let's show what happens on this particular intake, and also give you guys a quick snippet of what to check for and what to replace if you have that problem. So let me just turn on the smoke test machine. So if you come close, you can see that there is absolutely no leak over here. So that's where the hose basically mates onto the turbo, and you can see that there is absolutely no leak. Right, so just give it some time and you guys can see. So in the last Pure 800 car we had worked on, so basically it started leaking over here. So basically that leak comes if the O-ring is actually damaged or worn out. So in case you guys install an intake like this and see a massive leak over there, we would request you guys to inspect the O-ring and if possible replace it. Replacing the O-ring usually fixes the issue 90% of the times. But in this car the O-ring was in a very good shape, so we basically just reused that. So yeah, to show you guys that there's actually a proper smoke test happening. So you can see that there's no smoke coming over there, but if you look at the oil cap, you can see there's plumes of smoke coming out, right? So basically the smoke is going all the way through and then coming out over here, basically showing that this intake works perfectly fine without any leaks. So let me quickly show you guys the differences between the pre-LCI downpipes and the LCI downpipes. So for starters, the clamping style is very different between both the downpipes. Let me put them next to each other and you can see the difference. So this uses a regular clamp, whereas the LCI downpipes use a V-band clamp. So typically what happens is, if you're running a downpipe like this, the midpipe also has to have a fitting where it goes onto the V-band. However, what we do is we basically shift all of these cars, even on the LCIs, to basically the pre-LCI downpipes and the midpipes, because these fit better, and also the quality of these downpipes is really nice. For example, this is an Active Autoworks downpipe, and over the years I've installed quite a lot of downpipes, and the quality of the material used is actually very nice and solid. So the thickness of the material used on this downpipe is also pretty nice, which is why it doesn't feel tinny or hollow. So the sound on these downpipes is very nice. So the next difference is basically the O2 sensors. You can see that the pre-LCI downpipes basically have O2 sensor, pre-cat and post-cat is what we would generally call it. So on the stock downpipe, it is basically the same. So you have an auto sensor pre-catalytic converter, you have an auto sensor post-catalytic converter, but you also have an extra line for the OPF basically. So we get rid of all this as well, and this side of the thing connects to another electrical connector, so that will also be removed from this car. So now that we are done discussing the differences between the downpipes, Let's move on to the mid pipes. So the next biggest difference is basically the mid pipes on both the cars. So what we have here is the LCI mid pipe, and what we have here is the pre-LCI mid pipe. So if you notice both the mid pipes very closely, these have basically the OPFs. Similarly, on the S58 cars, you will have the OPFs and secondary catalytic converters as well. So that makes the S58 cars even more muted in terms of exhaust note. So what we are going to do is, since majority of the restriction comes from these two bad boys over here, along with the catalytic converter in the downpipe, we are going to throw a decat downpipe on this car. We are going to throw a pre-LCI mid pipe. So another advantage with the pre-LCI mid pipe is, although it is a little heavier compared to the aftermarket options, like I mentioned before with the Active Autoworks downpipe, the material used on this is actually quite robust, and when it is not very thin and tinny, the exhaust note also improves leaps and bounds. So the exhaust note on these sound much better than something like an aftermarket downpipe which has very thin walls, and hence the exhaust note is very shrill in such exhaust. So that's another reason why we pick, the pre-LCI mid pipe, and it's pretty much a bolt-on fit. So all you have to do is you have to chop off the cat back over here and basically swap this mid pipe onto this. And the biggest advantage of doing a swap like this is basically very few companies actually make good downpipes for the LCI variants which have the V-band clamp. However, the minute you move to a pre-LCI mid pipe and that has the regular, clamp like this, your options are basically unlimited, because all of the North American cars run this. Some of the European cars before the OPFs became a thing all run this. So there are dime a dozen companies that actually make downpipes for these cars with a regular, fitting clamp style. So we finished fitting the exhaust. We also check for clearances to make sure that it's not touching the heat shield anywhere or any of the braces. Let's just move it around and see. Everything looks good to go. So now that we've installed those HEL brake lines, all we have to do is bleed the brakes with the pressure bleeder, and then we can put the car on the dyno once we have all the tires mounted back onto the car. The proper way to bleed the brakes on these cars is basically by using a pressure bleeder. So we have filled up quite a significant amount of brake oil in this. So for these cars, we are using the BMW supplied OE brake oil. So now what we have to do is, as per BMW's workshop manual, you have to pressurize this to about 2 bar, which is about 28 psi. So let's do that, and then we'll slowly start to open each of the nipples on the calipers in order to get them bled. Okay, so we are good to go. We have finished installing all the parts. The car is back on the dyno. I have just put the car in dyno mode, and I haven't flashed any map yet, so it's still on the stock map. So I wanted to capture a data log to see how the ECU will behave once it realizes that the downpipe and a midpipe have been installed. And if my assumptions are right, the car should throw a check engine light on the first run or the second run for the OPF. So let's give that a go and see how it does. Let me bring it to 5 like we usually do. Tune and all the exhaust mods we have done. Usually these cars are pretty sensitive and don't like it. The car is absolutely not liking what we did. So the way the car is moving is really slow, the way it's climbing up the rails. Expected. We have a 182808 error code that has dropped on the screen, and that is basically the auto particulate filter. So clearly the car did not like that, And let me quickly take a screenshot so that we can upload it on the video as well for you guys to see. So there you go, our assumption was bang on. I expected the car to throw a OPF error, and on the very first run it did. The car was basically revving really slow, and at about 6000 RPM it just basically cut all power, and yeah, that's that. So now let's flash the maps and see what it looks like. So the beauty of this platform is how quickly the maps flash. So I just started flashing the stage 2 map, and it's run for about 7 seconds now. And yeah, the writing of the flash is done. So it's just clearing all the code. So the entire process is about 15 to 20 seconds at best. That's one of the biggest advantages of these platforms and being able to use apps like these. It's so easy to flash, coming from the VRS days where we used to take 18 to 20 minutes for a single flash. This is actually a welcome change, you know, for us to save time and get things done quickly. Okay, so the flash is done. Let's just cycle the ignition once, and let's put the car in dyno mode and start deadlogging the car. So yeah, we finished flashing the TCU tune from XHP stage 2 map. So we also reflashed the ECU without the torque limiter being ticked. So we are almost done for the day. Just want to do a couple of back-to-back pulls just to see how the car is doing now, and we'll call it a day. Get into 5th gear. So that was a really interesting experience. So before flashing the XHP map, we dynoed the same map with the torque limiter removed on the ECU using the boot mode app, and the car made 435 horsepower and 610 Nm. So the car on repeated back-to-back runs was hovering between 610 to 630 Nm. But once we flashed the XHP map and basically flashed the ECU map again with the torque limiter put back to the OEM, just with the XHP map, the car made a whooping 735 Nm. So that's a 120 Nm jump just by flashing the XHP map. So basically this shows how torque limiters basically affect the performance of the engine and why it is necessary to run a TCU tune in order to get the best performance out of the car. So when we started the day, the car did 375 horsepower and 581 Nm of torque. And now that we are done with all the flashing and all the installation of the hardware, on the final run, the car did 438 horsepower and 736 Nm. and I believe these are the highest numbers for any M340i that we have done on stage 2 running on pump gas. Now let's take the car off the dyno and take it out for a spin and see how it behaves on the road. Let's take a quick look at the data log that we have done on this car. So as you can see, we have just flashed the stock tune. So there is no tune on the car, and we've done the exhaust and the intake mods. So we are quickly going to overlay the engine speed. So this run was started at about 1500 odd RPM, and we've revved it all the way to about 6600 RPM. Now quickly let me overlay the boost actual, which is shown in green graph over here, and the boost request. So the blue graph is basically what the ECU is requesting based on the stock tune. However, the boost actual is the green graph. So what ends up happening is when you remove the exhaust restriction on the B58s, it basically translates to the turbo overboosting. So as you can see over here, the stock ECU map is actually requesting only 13.3 psi. However, the turbo is overboosting and overspinning to about 15.3 psi. This is predominantly because we're running a decat downpipe and a OPF deleted midpipe without actually accounting for the restriction removed on the stock map. So this is exactly what we ask people not to do, because what this translates to, so every time the green line is above the blue line, what the ECU does as a safety precaution is to basically shut the throttle. So now quickly let me select throttle angle and show you guys what's happening. So at about 2595 RPM, you can see the throttle is at 98% over here, and then it starts to close down to about 40% at boost tip in. And you can notice that for the remainder of the entire RPM range, the throttle basically is not 100%, which it should be. So a lot changes over here in this band where the actual boost and the target boost are actually quite close to each other, and that is why the throttle closure basically improves to about 97 or 98% over here. And once again, as the boost actual starts to skyrocket over the requested boost by the ECU on the stock map, you can notice that the throttle starts shutting again all the way up until red line. Now let's quickly take a look at the data log where the stage 2 map has been flashed. You can see over here that we are running a multi-map stage 2 on the car right now. And let's look at how everything transpires based on what we had shown earlier. So let me add the engine speed into the mix. So we started the run at about 1650 RPM, and we've carried the run all the way to about 7000 RPM. So this is predominantly because when we flash the XHP TCU tune, we can basically turn it into manual mode and turn off auto upshift. Now let's quickly look at boost actual versus the boost target on the stage 2 map. You can notice that the green line, which is the boost actual, always remains below the commanded boost on the stage 2 map. So this is how the turbo basically is not overspinning or overboosting. And in order to show how that translates with regards to throttle angle compared to what we had seen earlier, you can see that once I hit the throttle angle, we have the throttle angle that's come up over here. Unfortunately, because of a scaling issue, you cannot see the throttle angle properly. Let me just turn off the engine speed and show you guys the difference. Let me quickly also turn off these two. You can notice that the throttle remains open the entire duration of the RPM or the run. So we are done with all the installation and the dyno testing and the tuning. Now we're just taking the car out for a spin. The customer is basically waiting for us, so we're going to deliver the car to him. Let me quickly do one small pull. The way this B58 sounds with these exhaust mods is just beautiful. And when you go part throttle to about 5000 RPM and let off the throttle, the MST intake makes a beautiful whistling sound. I'm not sure if you guys can hear the induction note from here, but yeah, it's pretty audible inside the cabin. Let's just slow down a little. A couple of rough patches over here. Yeah, we are in Sports Plus mode. Man, the way this car is moving. So yeah, incidentally, like I was mentioning earlier, this is the highest horsepower any car with the stage 2 setup has done on pump fuel on our dyno. And yeah, so we're going to take the car out for a spin day after tomorrow, do some roller shots, do some road logging and some draggy runs hopefully. And yeah, we'll bring the car back to the garage, see how it feels, make sure that everything is retightened, retorqued, Nothing is loose, the exhaust hasn't moved or isn't touching anywhere. And yeah, can't wait to see the customer's reaction once he drives the car, because this thing has just turned into a rocket. So give us a little more time. Let's get on to the main road where we'll have a small stretch to open up the engine and see what it really feels like. So we are getting onto some open roads now. So I'll open it for a while for you guys. So yeah, we are going to hit some traffic as we're entering the city. That's it for now. We'll catch up when we start doing the road testing in a couple of days from now. Let's quickly take you guys through all the list of mods that have been installed on this car. So right here we have the MST V2 version of the intake. We have an Active Waterworks decat downpipe along with the BMW pre-LCI midpipe. And for a slight change from the other builds we've done so far, this car also is running the DO88 charge pipe as well. So apart from this, we obviously have the Femto unlock for the ECU, and we are running the boot mode GCU tune and the XHP TCU tunes. So yeah, we've completed yet another successful stage 2 M340i. So we dragged the car just a while ago. Unfortunately, roads are completely wet. It's been pouring for the last 48 hours in Bangalore, I think because of some cyclonic effect. So on completely damp roads, the car did 0 to 100 in 3.8 seconds and a quarter mile in 11.8 seconds, which is not bad. Considering the fact that if we had dry roads, the same setup would basically do 11.6 in the quarter mile on pump gas. This car is pretty much doing the times it should be. So what I'm going to do now is see if we can find a small dry patch of road where I can do another run. So yeah, like I said, the roads are extremely wet today. Very difficult to get any sort of good timings out of the cars. Let's see if we can get one run in. So I'm quickly going to get to the displays we require for getting a good launch. Let me secure the phone. I don't think we're going to get a good time. It's just way too, how do I put it, damp roads to get a good launch in. Okay. Nope, way too much wheel spin. But the exhaust note sounds really nice. I'm not sure if you guys can hear this, but this sounds bloody brilliant. So yeah, I think there's no point draggy testing the car anymore. So let's talk a little bit about how the car feels to drive. Let's quickly get onto the other side of the road and yeah, so I'm going to pull up the window a little so that you guys can hear the exhaust note. So, like I mentioned earlier, the car is running a Active Waterworks decat downpipe and pre-LCI BMW midpipe, and the engine note actually sounds very nice. So, we are in Sport Plus mode. It's just the perfect amount of exhaust note that you want to highlight the B58's beautiful engine characteristics. We have turned off the pops and bangs on this particular car because the owner of this car is a doctor and he lives in a small town and we don't want him to go around terrorizing their neighbors. But yeah, the car sounds really nice. Car is moving really nice. We have done a couple of data logs. The data logs all look fine. The dyno charts look fine. So we are pretty much sorted for this build. Let me do a little more that is it from us, guys. We hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as we enjoyed making it. This is Rahul on behalf of Harmonixx Tuning, signing off.